One of the processes at the end of our discussion was this gigantic mechanism called the electron transport chain, also abbreviated as ETC in some of the biological textbooks. So this concept of ETC is the final process that allows your body and our cells and life in general and organisms to harness ATP. And the way it does this is by utilizing a series of protein pumps, including one proton pump. So if you look at the picture here, you'll see that there are four major players, four peripheral proteins, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth one is on the bottom here, so this is the fourth one. And this one is number 1, number 2, and number 3. And these peripheral proteins are able to move and migrate protons from one to the other. And you're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal about protons? What's the deal about this proton H-positive ion that's being moved around? Well, these H-positive ions represent energy, right? They might not look like energy, but they are the ability to create energy. And so what happens here is that these protons don't come from nowhere. They don't come from magic and space, but they come from these high electron carriers, which are called NADH and FADH2. So these two guys right here are what they call cofactors. You can think of them as vitamins. And these vitamins are able to provide the protons needed to move that energy down this assembly line. So if you look at the picture, you'll see that this electron is being transported across these pumps and these proteins all the way to the other side. Two things that show up here. Number one is that with the electron transport chain, this is considered an aerobic pathway. So that means aerobic just means that it needs oxygen. And if you look closely at this picture, you can see that there's oxygen at the bottom. Okay, O2, right? Oxygen is O2. And some of the protons combine with oxygen, and that makes something that we all know called water, right? So the whole point here is that your body generates quite a bit of water just from this process. And then the final part of this reaction involves a proton pump. And this is what you're looking at over here. This is what they call the ATP synthase, which actually moves the proton into the cell to make ATP. So in other words, all you're really doing is building enough energy to get this final proton pump, this ATP synthase, to do its job. And that is the electron transport chain. That's what it's all about. At the final stage of metabolism, you want the ETC to be working and doing its job and pumping out ATP. All right, so this is, I think we had a chance to do one of these questions, or maybe left off right here, but let's go ahead and do this one. So which of the following pathways generates the majority of ATP from energy nutrients? If you didn't get a chance to answer, please answer this. I believe we left off on this question last week. Yeah, 76 people answered. So go ahead and select your answer. And a couple typos there, so it's glycolysis, not glycolysis. So glycolysis. All right, so go ahead and pick your answer. Give you guys a few seconds, so a few people have just joined. So if you just joined, make sure to log into Top Hat, all right? So it's important you start getting these points. They add up. We have 97 people, but only 86 answers. So I'll give you guys a few more seconds to answer the question. Or 93, that's a good sign. We need a few more. All right, so I'll give you guys a countdown here. It's 25 seconds to count down. If you need a little bit more time, just raise your hand. I gotta restart the slider here. Try to figure out what my webcams are turning on. All right. Okay. So let's take a look. So what is the? Oops. I was playing with my webcam. It didn't work. So let's see. What is the answer? The correct answer is. Let's take a look. All right. Electron transfer chain. Really good. Awesome. So we just went over that. Nice. Okay. Let's do one more. So which of the following pathways does not occur in the mitochondria? So we talked about the glycolysis, the prep reaction, the intermediate phase, the citric acid cycle, and electron transfer chain. So which one of the four is not in the mitochondria? And as we're doing these questions, you're probably thinking, why are we doing these questions during the lecture? And part of this is that you're getting the practice in real time for the exam. You're also getting comfortable reading questions, and also you're getting a chance to practice, really just having more exposure to this, right? So that's the whole point. Okay, all right, so another minute, a little bit over a minute to answer. So take a look at your notes. You could also look at your Learn Smart. You could use your resources and find the answer. All right, another 25 seconds left. So go ahead and pick your answer so you get the points for the day. All right, 10-second countdown. Here we go. All right. Okay, so let's see, what is the answer? So the answer to this question is glycolysis. Awesome, great, good job. So one tip here is glycolysis is considered the anaerobic. Anaerobic means no oxygen required. So that means this is the only one of the four that your body can utilize to make short bursts of energy. So when you're weightlifting, trying to create your PR, your 1 rep max, that's going to be able to show you the energy, just that short window of frame. You don't make too much energy from that, but what is important is that you have these different opportunities to create energy when needed. All right? Okay, so good job. So if you got it right, great. If you did it, take some notes and then reflect. All right, good. Okay, so the last couple of slides I have for this topic, as we wrap up this module, is that we've spent some time talking about energy. We talked a little bit about metabolism. And just to give you a sense, and this is a really good number to keep in your mind, is that when you take in sugar and carbohydrates, one sugar glucose molecule can net an average of about 36 to 38 ATP molecules. And on the other side, if you were to do a keto diet, right, just eating purely based, fat-based compounds, nuts, butter, bacon, meat, protein, heavy fat-based compounds, you could generate up to 108 ATP. So in other words, the ability to use sugar is good, right? And it's quick to get these energy, but a fat molecule could potentially get more energy output. So that's also why when you eat more fatty-based foods, you should feel more fuller, and as a result of that, your body should be able to energize longer. Okay, so it really comes down to macros and your preferences and kind of your food sources, but these are your macros, right? Protein getting amino acids, carbs are glucose, and fats are going to be fatty acids and glycerol. And what you can see over here on the far right, which I wanted to highlight and just your attention, is that if you were to eat a keto diet, right? So right now there's a pretty big fad on that. You know, I think it's great in terms of shocking your body and then creating this gap and this sudden weight loss. But is it sustainable to do this for years on end? It gets kind of hard. You might have to be a party pooper at some birthday parties and not eat cake. But most of the time, if you were to do something like that that's keto or heavy fat based or heavy protein based, it's actually not too bad. And if you look at the pathway, you can see that fatty acids and glycerol are generally able to come into the pathway at the acetyl-CoA, right at the middle point. And so you're able to skip glycolysis to some degree and go right down to the ETC. And remember, ETC is where we make most of the ATP, right? We just talked about that. This is where most of the energy is made. Okay? All right, so that's the pathway that I want to show you to give you a visualization of where macros enter this reaction and why you eat the foods that you might like. You know, if you like to eat protein, you have the ability to come into any of these pathways. If you eat fats, you have 2 opportunities. If you eat carbohydrates, you only have this one pathway. All right, so now what's the deal with the claims about energy drinks, right? So energy drinks obviously say they give you energy, 5-hour energy on the picture here. Shows you that gives you X amount of time of energy. And if you look closely at the ingredients charts for an energy drink or one of these quote-unquote fat burning or muscle building energy drinks, what you're going to see is an array of ingredients, and some of these are vital, right? One of the big ones that you'll hear about are vitamins. Vitamins represent this broad family of organic compounds that your body is able to use because it helps speed up and assist with different metabolic processes. So it's not really the main player. It's just an almost a sidekick for the reaction to take place. And they're divided into 2 broad categories, all right? So you have the fat soluble, right? So basically fat based, and then you also have the water based, all right? So those are your 2 big categories of the vitamins. So fat based versus water based, and the fat based ones, which are the ones that tend to be able to absorb quicker, include the ones like the vitamin D's, right? And then you have the ones that are water-based, like the A's and the C's, which are mostly more protective for cell damage, right? So if you're going through injury, or if you're going through there's this concept of free radicals. I don't know if anybody's heard of this before, but free radicals is whenever your body is exposed to different kinds of reactions that might disrupt the bonds, and that causes the energy to be off. So it causes reactions to take place when they shouldn't. And one way to neutralize these free radicals is using vitamins, because vitamins can donate protons and electrons wherever it might need. And so you're just basically giving this disruption what it wants by not damaging what your body is already balanced out at. So here are some examples, like niacin, vitamin B, B6, vitamin B, folic acid, taurine is an amino acid, and then tyrosine amino acid. So you might see a mixture of amino acids, proteins, mixed with vitamins that help you give energy. And of course, the combination and the amount of this might range depending on what kind of product you use and how much you can take in at one time. Okay, so is it wise to take in a really high dose of these micronutrients at one time? It depends on your lifestyle, depending on how you're taking it in. But I think over the maximal absorption would be to take it over several courses of hours rather than just one big chunk at one time. All right, so here is a little deeper dive into vitamins. Vitamins really are not the main player, but really like a sidekick. Okay, so think of it like a sidekick. And then if you look at this picture, it'll make it so much easier to understand. So you have an enzyme that is blue here. So this is some enzyme, a protein in the body that has to perform a reaction. And when you don't have the enzyme, it really doesn't work. It doesn't work that well, right? So some chemical can come in, and for some reason it won't bind, it won't affect this enzyme, and so nothing happens to this entire reaction. So you're not able to optimize this reaction or to get something out of it. On the right-hand side, when you have the same exact enzyme, but you have the right coenzyme, or this vitamin that comes into play, it can bind onto this right-hand side of that enzyme and allow the red box to interact and fit better. And because it fits better, it's able to work, and now the reaction proceeds. That's really what a vitamin does. It's a coenzyme, it's a cofactor, it's a co-player to assist in the reaction. And earlier I was telling you about two kinds, right? The water soluble, like the vitamin C and the B's, and then the fat soluble, like the vitamin D's. The one that we can all probably relate a little bit more to is probably the vitamin D. Vitamin D is not only generated from exposure from the sunlight and UV, but it's the one that gets modified in your kidneys, and then your liver has to rearrange it into an active vitamin hormone derivative. So in other words, some of these vitamins are not just an item that you take in and your body gets. Your body requires different organs to convert and to massage it into the right form before it can be fully utilized. Okay? So that's all I'm going to say to that. We're not going to all become dietitians overnight or understand all the macros and insights, but just to give a gauge to what we're talking about here is that you take in different energy sources to power this reaction. Vitamins, whether it be B1, B6, vitamin C, vitamin D, B12, they come into the pathway at different phases. But their main job is not really to steer the reaction, but to help make the reaction more efficient. And this picture does a brief illustration of that. So you can see vitamin B12 targets glycolysis. Vitamin B1, B6, biotin, they target more of the mitochondria. So that's why when you take your multivitamins, there is something to say, because if you're not eating a complete meal and not getting the sufficient amount of nutrients from your food, then it might be good to have a supplement, right? But if you're eating pretty clean and taking in a relatively balanced diet, then you might not need to supplement with those pills. And of course, there's a convenience factor as well. All right, so that is the wrap up here, and this is a list of some of the more common vitamins you might hear about as you go about your careers and your journey through finding the best diet for you. So vitamin B1, this is also known as thiamine. The main function of this is that it helps with the metabolism and breakdown of glucose and amino acids. Vitamin B6 is directly used for breakdown of organic nutrients and macros. B12, which is found in almost all kinds of energy drinks and all kinds of energy quote products, is going to help you initiate faster conversion of fats and proteins. And then for those that want to have healthy skin and look young, you also want to have biotin, niacin. These are mostly important used for generating of DNA and also transfer of CO2 and waste. So your body needs to be able to move some of the byproducts of metabolism out. Niacin and riboflavin, these two are probably, I'm going to circle them. These two are the NAD and FAD that I talked about earlier. And so earlier during the ETC, the NADH, right, the guy that actually carries that electron and the proton, the NAD, and then the FADH2, that's what these are. All right, those are only abbreviated. So NADH, FADH2 is basically niacin, riboflavin, and you can see that pretty much, unless you're able to eat a very complete diet, and by complete I mean having a good amount of carbohydrates, an adequate amount of protein, different sources of fats, whether it be nuts, whether it be eggs, whether it be protein and yolks. You want to have a mixture. And that's why it's tricky, because you tend to gravitate to foods you like to eat. And that's everybody, right? So once you eat certain kinds of foods, you're like, I like the taste of this, I can stick to it, it's a little bit easier. And so unless you're able to diversify your food products, it might be a good idea to have some of these supplements when you need them. On cell division or cancer. And this is one that really can hit home to many of us, or you might know of somebody that had to battle cancer. And I'm going to use cancer as the topic or the theme to guide our discussion. So that way you know exactly why this is so relevant to us, right? So one thing about science classes is that you learn all this theory, you hear a lot about these different concepts, but it is hard to find that connection with how it affects you in your life. And until it does, that's when you're like, dang, this is pretty important. I really want to know about it. So this next big module, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to uncover a couple of these key objectives. Number one, I'm going to describe how cancer is a physiological disease that occurs at a cellular level. We're going to talk a little bit about how to explain the activities of a cell, which ultimately control the DNA, and understand how cells divide normally, and then what happens when we cell regulate that process. We're going to understand how mutations in genes that control the cell cycle may lead to cancer, and of course, distinguish between what a normal cell is and what is one that has the potential to become cancerous. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between the different stages of cancer, and then explain how cancer affects normal physiology and results in death. And we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the methods that we can detect cancer in the body. And just to give you a sense here, a cell is so small, right? It's tiny. And it is almost impossible to detect cancer when you have one single cell that is cancerous. You need to be able to see upwards about 1,000 to 10,000 cells that are cancerous before you can actually detect it. So that is why detection is a big part, right? And obviously if you're able to find it out and have treatment and be aggressive with that early on, you might be able to get it to go into remission. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this concept. So why do cells become cancerous? And how does cancer affect the body? And of course, what are treatment options? So the story all begins with the biology of cancer. And cancer, for those that don't know, represents a disease state that is when your body is not able to regulate or to fine-tune the way it divides. Cell division is a very natural process for everybody, because cells have the ability to differentiate and specialize. But what cancer cells are cells that are non-specialized, and they don't really contribute to any function. They're just a mass of cells that have dividing nonstop. And obviously it makes sense that your body could have this error, because whenever you get injured every day in our lives, some cells are dying and some cells are regenerating. And as you die and regenerate, cells die and regenerate over time, you might have some error in that process, which could lead to cancer. So most cancers are named based on the types of cells or tissues that they originate from. So this is some of the terminology you might hear about as you go into this field, or if you get interested in the allied health programs. Melanoma is the skin cancer, or the formation in the epithelial tissue on the outer part of the skin. Leukemia is when you have the cancer forming inside the white blood cells in the bone marrow. Carcinoma is whenever you have it occurring inside some internal lining of an organ or skin. Sarcoma is whenever you have a cancerous development inside connective tissue. That's going to be your collagen, your bone, regions where the structural support of the body occurs. And then you can also have lymphoma, which is going to be namely inside the immune system or white blood cells. And they can vary. There's a lot of variations to them. some of the causes when you think about cancer, obviously it's hard to pinpoint what exactly can cause this, but some environmental factors might be at play, but some is also based on inheritance. And what's not preventable is you don't really control your genes, right? You get inherited from your mom and dad and your grandparents, and so sometimes certain kinds of gene factors might have a higher risk factor. And of course, what you eat and the environment, what kind of chemicals you're exposed to, the toxins your bodies have to fight, these environmental factors like radiation, smoking, pollutants, they can all play a role, and even viruses. So that's why, is it a good idea to constantly be exposed to viruses, whether it be hepatitis, maybe papillomavirus, you name it? Is it good for your body to encounter viruses? Probably not. Okay? So all these damages and potential exposures from the environment can cause a chance of cancer. So there are misconceptions of cancer, and you might even think about that, oh, cancer only happens in the elderly, right? That is not necessarily true. Okay, the reason why is because it's really a matter of just your environment and your genetics. And sometimes, depending on your genes, for example, when I say genetics, the best example I could give is that there are individuals that might be that might have a certain gene in their family, and the gene is called a BRCA1, BRCA2, and I'm going to write this down on the screen here, but you can read a little bit more about them if you're interested, but the BRCA1 and these BRCA2, these are gene names that code for the breast cancer, and these are normally the breast cancer tumor suppressor genes. So when you have some mutation of these genes, let's say something goes wrong in that genetic information in the DNA that codes for BRCA1, BRCA2, then there might be a higher chance that you could develop into cancer. Another one is going to be another gene called the RET gene. So again, these abbreviations, these mnemonics, these names you're seeing, they stand for a certain gene in the body, but the RET gene is one that normally suppresses the thyroid to have mutations, and then when you have various kinds of damage to that gene, you could potentially cause it to not work properly, and now you have cancerous cells growing. Over here, just to give you some stats here, so cancer is the 4th leading cause of death in young people. Males have 1 in 2 chance of developing cancer in their lifetime, and for females, it's 1 in 3 chance. So it all depends on your lifestyle, your environment, your genes, and why you might think that females tend to have a higher chance. I want you to think about that question. Why is that the case? Why is there that ratio? Why is there the difference? So males have a higher chance, but why do females have 1 in 3? And one thing I also wanted you to think about is back when they first started studying cancer, the story really began in certain cells and tissues that are really aggressive and dividing, right? So for those that are in this room here, we all know that there are differences between the male and female, right? The female goes through the ovarian and the uterine cycle. That's also why you have the menstruation discharge during the month. And if you think about that, right, every single month as a female, right, until you hit menopause, until men also hits andropause as well, but until we hit the menopause phase, right, every month you are having this crazy fluctuation of hormones leading to the dislodge and the breakdown of some tissue inside your uterus. And it's a very, very aggressive event, right? So your cells grow and they break down and they slow off. They break down, they slow off, and that happens over and over until you're either pregnant or until you hit menopause, 45 or something like that. And during that window, is there a chance for those cells to mutate or go in the wrong direction, right? So chances are it could happen. And of course also lifestyle, right? So maybe just because of the stats, these stats again are not set in stone. It could be affected based on diet. It could be because males maybe have a higher chance of smoking, maybe alcohol plays a role. But there's a number of factors that could affect these numbers, right? So don't take them too seriously. But over here is a really interesting chart that I want to show you. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So on the top here, let's look at the top chart. This is the amount of cancer per 100,000 male in population. And then over here, we have the death rates for the males, okay, due to cancer. So what you can see over here is you can see a couple of lines, and these lines represent different kinds of cancers. You have stomach cancer, you have lung cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, liver cancer, leukemia. And so if you look at this, what you can see is that first and foremost is as you go over time, so we can look at one line at a time, but let me use another marker here. So as you go from left to right, you're moving in the years, right? So now you're going from back in the 80s now to the 2000s, right? And you can see how the lines change. The one that probably strikes the most is probably going to be lung cancer. Right, you can see that? So during the 50s, it was not too high. During the 70s, it went all the way up. If you follow the blue line, I'm tracing it. And then if you go to 80s, it keeps on going. And back to 90s. So all that means is that maybe back in the 80s and before the 90s, smoking or maybe lung pollutants and different kinds of harsh toxins that you can smoke in, whether it be cigarettes or cigars, whatever it may be, those were widely used, and that might contribute to this, right? And now, as that became more studied, people started cutting that off, and so the rates of cancer, lung cancer, dropped down, right? So that could be one factor, and of course, it depends on where you live. If you're working in a coal mine, if you're exposed to asbestos inside the fume, all a number of factors could contribute to this, right? Other ones include like prostate cancer has dropped down tremendously, and this might be because that there's better detection. You could see the colon cancer, maybe colonoscopy also can contribute to early detection, and therefore that's dropping down as well. But you can see over here that the pancreas cancer is relatively stable, and so is the liver cancer. Right? Liver cancer is going up. So these two cancers are interesting because liver cancer and pancreas cancer are ones that are, first of all, they're increasing in mortality, which means that in the current generations, these are the bigger ones that are killing more people. And also, they're harder to detect. Maybe we don't have the right tools to properly detect pancreas and liver cancer. That's a problem right now, right? That's one thing where there could be a potential technology breakthrough that could help. So those are the two for male that are kind of on the rise. Okay, and I know for a fact that pancreas cancer is very hard to process and to identify because it plays so many roles in the body. And then over here on the bottom here, we have the ones for the females, all right? So we're going to wrap this up by showing you just a comparison. So for females, same exact chart, you can see that it's a little bit different. Number one, you can see the biggest one is probably the lung cancer. It's not nearly as high. Or the green line, you can see it's not nearly as high as the one on top. Over here, breast cancer has dropped down tremendously. So that's actually a good thing, right? So that means detection is better now. We know it's the BRCA1, BRCA2 genes, so breast cancer rates are going down. Still, pancreas is kind of elevating, the purple line. And the uterus line is also dropped down as well, right? So there's definitely some good trends to see. And could there be differences in lifestyle between males and females? I think so, right? Depending on where you work, the job, and also potentially just your dietary preferences, maybe also genetics, right? So there's a number of factors. So with all this information in your mind, and we compared males and females, I have one question for you for the day. Okay, so let's go ahead and let me show you. I'll come back to this on Thursday, but let me show you one question for the day. Cancers are named based on which of the following? All right, so if you were listening, you should know this, and go ahead and respond. And after we finish this question, that will be it for today. That will be the wrap up for today's session. All right, so here we go.